I'll send you the link to this if you want to, if you get really, really bored and you want to go watch it again. All right. Well, thanks very much. And thanks everyone for stepping up to do this work this year. Hopefully we'll go through this year with a relatively normal testing season. My focus here is just to try to hit the highlights of the things that you really need to know for the year to be successful. My sort of mantra on all of this is be prepared. The better that we prepare in advance for the testing season, the smoother it'll go. So I'm going to try to hit the things that mostly that tend to trip people up when they're doing test coordination in their buildings. And then, you know, Mary and I are here to support you no matter what. And just to make sure that I want to introduce Mary Hochberg. So Mary is and I are the assessment team. So either or both of us can help you out throughout the testing season, whatever you need. Okay. Hey, Mary. She's just right across the hall from me here. But all right. So here's our agenda for today. While I'm going through the agenda, and so just to save time, if you want to introduce yourself, please just go ahead and throw it in the chat. Your name, the school that you're in, and whether or not you're a brand new or a returning school test coordinator, so that we can all know who each other is. I'll also give you access to a spreadsheet I have that has all test coordinators in it, so they can be a resource for you as well if you're new to this work or have particular questions. If there are other people who are test coordinating in the district that you might know, I'll send you that list of folks as well. So for today, our agenda is introductions, and then we'll go over what your core test coordinator duties are in your building. We'll talk a little bit about testing practices and culture, ways to set things up in your building so that students can be as successful as possible with state assessments. We'll go through a list of things that I call avoiding the pitfalls or the gotchas. We'll have some updates, new things that have come in this year. There's not too much new, but there's a couple things. And then just some reminders about things that are important for you to pay attention to during the time that you're doing this work. And then hopefully we'll have some time at the end for discussion, or if there's anything in particular that you want me to demo for you. There's some, especially with new folks, may not be familiar, for example, with how to get into the OSAS portal, how to look up things like where are all my kids at testing? How many kids have tests that are going to expire soon? Things like that might come up. So I'm happy to even stay longer afterwards if you need some additional help with those things. And of course, any of those sorts of things as the year progresses, if you get jammed up or you don't know how to do something, just reach out to Mary or I, and we're there for you. I mean, our job here really is to support you in a way that makes your job as easy as possible. So don't ever hesitate to reach out to us. Please don't ever think that you're bothering us or bugging us by asking questions. There are no dumb questions. So please just reach out to us if you need us at any time whatsoever. So here are your core duties. Those of you who've been doing this for a few years know these things already, but if you're relatively new to this, here's the things that you really need to pay attention to. Sort of job one is that you're going to train and support your test administrators in your building. Now, we do have the online course for them, just like we're doing here, but I do ask you to also spend some time with them face-to-face or over Google Meet, just to make sure they're all on the same page, and that if they have any questions of you, however you want to do that is up to you. We'll talk a little more about that later on. You're going to build your testing schedules in your building. So you're going to be working with your principals and your teachers and others in your building to set things up so that all your students get tested in a timely fashion. You're going to be responsible for sort of monitoring the fidelity of the whole testing process in your building. You're going to need to monitor testing progress so that making sure that all of your students do get tested before the test window closes. You need to work with your site techs and other tech folks in your building to make sure all the technology is ready to go for students to test. You will be responsible if there are any irregularities or improprieties that occur in your building during testing. It's your responsibility to report those to me or Mary. You're responsible for making sure that students have the supports that they need. If a student has a designated support or an accommodation, you need to ensure that those are provided or available to the students. So you'll need to work with your TAs to make sure that the students have access to the supports that they're supposed to get. You'll need to sort of manage the paperwork that comes across. For example, if there's portions of some of the tests that can be saved from one test session to the next. And so you're responsible for making sure those get stored securely between test sessions. You need to kind of establish and monitor the communication in your building with your parents. You definitely want parents to know when their kids are going to get tested, and what's going to happen during testing and how they need to prep their student for testing, good breakfast, things like that. So all those communications are part of what you need to pay attention to. And then, of course, to keep an open line of communication to Mary and I so that we can be sure and support you. So any questions on the duties? All good? All right. So let's talk a minute about testing practices and culture. I'm not going to belabor this too much. There's just some highlights here that I wanted to go over. So what we really want to do is we want to establish a really positive kind of culture and attitude in buildings around testing to not make it something that's, feels tedious to students. So just having a positive attitude is an important part. Making sure that all your TAs are properly trained so that they're not making mistakes and they're not allowing improprieties to take place. Another variable that you can control is just, those calendars and how those calendars are established and monitoring them. You'll want another variable that can be controlled just to make sure testing is successful is the order of testing. So in case you didn't already know this, you always want to try to do English language arts. For Smarter Balance, do ELA first before math, and then to do the CAT before the performance task. And it's been shown through a variety of research that if you keep this order, students tend to perform better on the assessments. You want to make sure that you're monitoring testing process and so that we don't have a minimum number of tests that expire on students. You want to control the variable of technology to make sure that machines are ready to go. I've talked with our whole net operations team here to make absolutely sure that all of the latest secure browsers are deployed to Chromebooks, are deployed to all of if you still are using labs in your building, that they're deployed to those machines, and that there's the correct match between the operating system and the secure browser so that we don't have any of those kinds of issues with technology. But beyond that, you, along with your site techs and STCs in your building, need to be monitoring the technology. Parent communications is another variable that can improve testing for your students in the school. And one way to do that too is to have your teachers, encourage your teachers and your parents to get in and use the sample tests or practice tests that are available in the OSAS portal so that students, especially the younger students, have some time sort of getting familiar with what the testing environment looks like. And don't forget, we've got a whole class of students who missed testing last year. So we've got students who normally, in fourth grade, who normally would have been taken Smarter Balanced last year in third grade, but they didn't take it. So this will be brand new for them. So an unusual situation where we have 2 full grade levels that have never seen these tests before. Sometimes younger kids, will struggle a little bit with keyboarding or using the small pad on the Chromebook. So if you've got some mice floating around your building, you might have a few of those available to TAs so that they can plug them in and let students use those if they're more familiar with a mouse. Although increasingly we're finding that most younger kids don't even know what a mouse is. They only know a trackpad. So that's less of a problem. And then the other variable is just to make sure that the machines are ready to go before you test. This is a little less of a problem right now since students are coming in every day with theoretically they're bringing their Chromebook with them in this one-to-one environment that we're getting into. but we have had issues where in 2 instances with Chromebooks. One is the students got the Chromebook at home for a long period of time and it's been shut down and hasn't been turned on for quite a bit of time. And so it hasn't received its updates. And that machine may not work if that's been the case. Or if you still have some carts in your building where you've got Chromebooks stored and they haven't been turned on for a long time, you want to make sure you get those out, get them fired up, and let them get all their updates so they're ready to go for testing. Questions on the variables?
I have one. For HOA, since they're at home, if they're on their Chromebooks, will they automatically get the updates like computers? Okay.
Yes. No matter where they are, when they log in, they will automatically get the updates.
Okay.
So,
Thanks.
yeah. And Barb, too, I want to just mention to you that I'm in the process of investigating remote testing for HOA. So I'll let you know how that works out, but that's a new capability that ODE is providing. I've not done my homework on it yet, so I've got a little bit of work to do on that first, but I'll let you know. All right. Any other questions? Are we good with that? All right, so besides variable control, the other is just this sort of prep and motivation. So things that we can do in the buildings to improve student performance on the assessments is make sure teachers are reviewing content, they're speaking positively about the assessment, they're talking about it being, in the context of growth and achievement, that not talking about whether you pass or fail, smart or balanced, for example. That during testing, they are giving students breaks. Snacks are totally okay. In fact, they're encouraged. And there's research that shows that if students have gum to chew on or something to bite on, that they do better on the test and last longer in a test session. And then just to make sure that your testing environment is set up nicely. These days we're doing especially at elementary, almost everything is happening in the classroom. So on Chromebooks. And so that's a great environment to test in. So this is a little less critical right now since we're not hustling students down to labs or libraries or places like that to test. So those are things that we can do for practices and culture, prep and motivation. Any other comments or ideas you guys have? All right, wait that appropriate, like count off to 5 seconds before I'll go on to the next slide. So. All right, excellent. So let's talk about the pitfalls or the gotchas. These are the things in my experience over the last 8 years of doing this, the sorts of things that seem to trip people up. So these were all reflected in the quiz. If you took the quiz at the end of the training, the online training, then hey Karen, if you took the quiz at the end of the online training, you'll see these same questions were in the quiz that you took. So let's go over those just so we're all clear on them. First one is retention and shredding. Sorry, I just want to close my door because I'm talking kind of loud. The simple thing is we do often get questions about what can I keep? What do I have to get rid of? What do I have to securely shred between test sessions? It's pretty simple. For math and ELA, you can keep your notes from the performance task. And for science or ELPA, you can keep notes. Everything else has to be shredded. So any other kinds of materials that a student might have from where they're starting a test on one day and continuing the next day, pretty much everything has to be securely disposed of except for notes. So that's pretty simple, but it is something that trips people up sometimes. Testing improprieties is another one that sometimes is confusing for folks. Really, the bottom line about improprieties is whether or not a student was afforded an unfair advantage on the assessment during the test session. So there's a lot of different ways that can happen. It can be flat out cheating that the student happens to do, passing notes, whatever it is, looking at phones. But there are other improprieties that come up. For example, a student using a wrong SSID to log in. A TA is coaching a student on particular questions. Students delivered the wrong test, a variety of these things. So we want to try to avoid as much of these as we possibly can. What I find is really, for a district our size and with the fact that we test over 11,000 students, we have an extremely low number of improprieties. And I have more questions about is this an impropriety than ones that actually turn out to be. So if a TA reports to you that something happens and you're unsure whether it really was an impropriety, check in with me or Mary just to make sure, because I would say that 90% of the time, if you are unsure, it probably wasn't an impropriety and something you have to worry about. So please just ask us if you're unsure. I mean, there have been some extreme examples. I did have one school one year. This is very unfortunate, where the TA was testing a large number of students. This was like 50, 60 students, and handed out calculators for them to use during the math test. So I had to invalidate all of those tests, every single one of them. So that's definitely not a place we want to get to. So just to be careful, that would be the non-allowable resource impropriety there. So just to be careful about those things. The big thing is collecting the phones and smart devices at the door and making sure making sure students have put them in their backpack and they're off in another part of the room so that they don't have access to any of those. But I mean, I've had cases, for example, where a test coordinator has said, "Hey, we collected all the phones, but one student forgot, and during the middle of the test, it was in their pocket and it rang. Is that an impropriety?" And of course, my answer is no. If you know for sure the student never had the phone out and they weren't accessing the phone during testing, then it's not a problem. So, I mean, it might be a discipline problem for you in the building, but it's definitely not an impropriety. Questions on improprieties? And the only other thing, and I'll tell you this later, if there is a real impropriety, I have a form that you have to fill out and send to me. And there's a variety of different. One of the things that's considered an impropriety is if a test expires. But just so you know right up front, if you have a student whose test has expired because of chronic absenteeism, you just keep trying to get them back in a test session, and you can't get them back in a test session because they're absent so much, I can get those tests reopened. So any of those come up, and it's because of a chronic absenteeism, it wasn't for some other reason, all you have to do is fill out an impropriety form, and I submit that to ODE, and usually within a day or two, I can get it reopened for you. And then the other thing about improprieties too, and this is in the TAM, if, for example, something that would be considered an impropriety, for example, would be if a student was supposed to have an accommodation and it was missed and they weren't provided that accommodation and they start the test. If the TA catches that within the first 5 questions or less, I can get the test reset back to 0. But if they go past 5 questions without the support, then then ODE is going to invalidate the test. So that would be the thing too, is that sometimes we have those come up where, it just stuff happens and, things slip through the cracks, and, we forget to give a student a certain support they're supposed to have. And hopefully the TA goes, whoa, wait, stop, pause the test in those first 5 questions, and then we can get it reset. Questions about improprieties? All right. So opt-outs and exemptions, just to be kind of clear again on exactly how these work. So there's 2 different ways that parents of students can tell you that they don't want their student to take a test. So there are, for Smarter Balanced, English Language Arts and Math, there is the opt-out. There is a form for opt-out. It's available on the HSD website, and mirrored on your school websites, and it's also on my state assessment website, those forms, so you can pull those down and make copies of them, have them in your office, however you want to handle those.
Hey, Tom.
Yeah.
So for those forms, they have a date on there for, I think it was like December 4th. Is there a way to edit it, or have they been changed?
No, unfortunately, I can't. Those forms are ODE forms on the opt-out, and I can't change that on the form. So just to make sure that your parents know that basically that date is meaningless. Parents can opt their students out right up to the day of testing. I've asked actually ODE to take that out a few times, because they think they're doing it as sort of a courtesy to us, but to try to get the opt-outs in for us to get them in as early as possible, but it's really causes more problems than it does solve.
Yeah, we've had some upset parents.
Yeah, so just tell them, ignore that. Don't even worry about it. And that's only on the opt-out. So they can opt out for any reason. All they have to do is turn in the form. Of course, before I encourage buildings, folks to have conversations with parents about opt-outs. We definitely want to try to have as many students test as possible, but really, that's more like encouraging them, but not shaming anybody into testing. So we don't want to force any students to test. So then exemptions for the science test and for the ELPA, it's a different process. It's a different form. At some point, hopefully the legislature will actually subsume these other assessments under the no fault opt-out, because it would be a lot easier on everyone. But technically speaking, they're supposed to indicate a religion or a disability to opt their student out of either the science test or the ELPA, summative and screener. We have never, if parents turn in an exemption from testing form for science or ELPA, and they don't check one of those boxes, we don't test them anyway. So we don't require those boxes to be checked. We want them to be checked, but we're never going to force a student to test if their parents say they don't want to test, don't want them to test. So don't worry about that. If you get the exemption form and one of those boxes isn't checked, it's not a problem. So. And then the other thing that we ask you to do is when you so here's the process for opt-outs. You're going to get the form. You're going to make a copy of the form and send a copy of the form to us, to Mary and I. I encourage you to put the original or a copy into their CUME file, just as paper backup. And then we need you to go into TIDE and to block the subject in TIDE. Now, this isn't technically a requirement, but it is an insurance policy. Because what blocking subjects in TIDE does is it means that if, for example, you bring a bunch of kids in and they, start administering the test and the TA doesn't know that one of the parents has opted out, when they go into the test session, it won't let them in if they've been blocked. So it's a good insurance policy so that you don't accidentally test a student. Which tends to upset students and really make parents mad. So it's a good insurance policy, and it's a pretty easy process to do. I'm hoping this year we'll be back to the normal number of opt-outs, which tends to be between 300 and 500 across the whole district. Last year it was in the thousands because of CDL. So we've developed an online opt-out, but I'm not quite ready to release that yet for a variety of reasons, including some political reasons. We don't, it's sort of like we don't want to make it super, super easy for parents to opt out if we can avoid it, because we really would like most students to test if they can. All right. Always get questions about what to cover, and this has gotten a lot more critical because we're really doing so much more testing in the classroom. The bottom line on that is if it's got content in it that could possibly help the student with the test itself, then it should be covered. That's it. That's kind of the whole ball of wax right there. So just have your teachers pay attention to that, and for especially elementary schools, you can use the butcher paper as a way that you're going to cover them with, or whatever, as an activity in the classroom, or however you want to handle that. But it's really just try to have your TAs be sensitive to whether or not there's information up on the walls that could help them with the assessment. The other question that we get is pause rules. Pause rules are a little bit complicated. The tricky part that we get into with the pause rules is the test will deliver at times groups of questions, or will deliver questions in groups or segments or more than one question on the screen. And so where we get tripped up on this is a student will be on a screen that has more than one question, And, as a good testing practice, I know, when I test, I'll go and do my first cut at all of the questions, and then I'll go back and think about them more, and sometimes want to change my answers. So if is there a segment or a group on the screen when the test administrator pauses the test? Let's say not all the students have finished, and they're going to resume on another day. So the TA is going to pause the test session. If a student was on a screen and answered all the questions, but didn't feel like they were finished yet, that they wanted to change those answers, when they come back in to the next test session, if it's after 20 minutes, like it's the next day, they can't get back into that screen. So they may say, hey, I had questions on there, I wanted to change. They won't be able to. So that's, generally what I say is, what I encourage you to do is tell your TAs, just warn students, okay, we're gonna in 10 minutes, we're gonna stop the test. So make sure that you've answered all the questions on the screen and then stop there. Don't go on to the next screen. Just wait there until we pause the test, something like that, so that we don't get caught in that. And other than that, that's really, for the most part, if they've answered the question, they can't go back. That's sort of the bottom line on the pause rule after 20 minutes.
But this is only for the CAT thing, right? Because if it's a PT and they're in the one section, they can review that section.
Correct.
Unless they submitted that section.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes, that is absolutely correct. Yeah, because that's really a submission. But if they're just sitting on a screen in the CAT and they've answered all the questions, but they haven't moved on to the next one, it won't let them back in afterwards. So that's the only place where we tend to get tripped up on that. All right. And then the other one is our test expirations. So there's just 45 days for everything except for the performance task, which is only 20 days. These are calendar days. So the main place that we've gotten jammed up with this in the past has been around spring break. So there have been times in the past where we've had a short period of time before spring break, and they've tried to get as many students tested as possible before break. They've started their PT in that week before the break. Well, by the time they get back, the 20 days have passed and they can't get back into the PT. So just be sensitive to that, making sure that that the students have enough time to finish the test within those before they expire. But as I said, if a test expires with a student because of chronic absenteeism, we can get it reopened for you. ELPA domain exemptions. These are basically the rules around domain exemptions, and this applies to both the ELPA and the screener. They have to be in an IEP or a 504. We need them in advance. The only people that can enter domain exemptions are Mary and I. So we need the form completed and shared with us in plenty of time for us to do that. And then to make sure that your TAs don't test those students until you hear back from us. We'll get the form, we'll enter the exemptions, and then we'll email you and say, this student's good to go. So unless you've heard from us that the student's good to go, don't test that student. If you're waiting on us for something for one of those kids, or you're unsure, just give Mary or I a call, and we'll make sure it gets taken care of. You can't have more than 3 domain exemptions. One place we get a little bit of trouble with this sometimes is special education SPED case managers will not be super familiar with how this all works and how to write it into IEPs. And they will, for example, we've had a few cases where they'll write all 4 domain exemptions into the IEP, and technically you can't do that. If a parent, if it's determined that the student shouldn't be tested in any of the 4 domains for ELPA, then that's an exemption from testing. Then they need to fill out the exemption form, the opt-out. That's the route that they would need to go. So you can't write in 4 domain exemptions into an IEP or a 504. But up to 3 can be exempted. Yeah, and that's all on those. Any questions on domain exemptions? Okay. Support type. So, if you've been in the TAM and the OAM, you know what the different types of supports are. We've got the three types: universal tools, designated supports, and accommodations. Difference in those is universal tools are available to all students. They can self-select those if they want. It's a good reason to get students into the practice test, so they have some chance to say, hey, I like it if I see the font bigger on the screen, or things like that they can self-select those universal tools. Designated supports are supports that are provided by a teacher or teacher team decision. And then, of course, accommodations have to be in an IEP or 504 plan. The one exception to that is if you have a student who becomes injured, they broke an arm or something and they can't use a keyboard, and so you need a scribe, for example, for them. That's technically an accommodation, but you can have that available to the student, even though it's not in an IEP or 504. And then the last thing about, okay, well, yeah, I'm going to go on and I'm going to come back to some other points on this. The other thing about accommodations and any of the supports is that there's two different types. If you're not familiar with that, there's embedded and non-embedded. There are very few embedded accommodations and designated supports. If you look in the Oregon Accessibility Manual, you'll see that's a pretty short list of ones that are actually embedded. Embedded accommodations are ones that are actually part of the test delivery system. So if it's something that actually has to be changed inside the test delivery system, those are considered embedded, and those you have to go in and turn those on in Tide for that kid. But there aren't very many of those. Most of the designated supports and accommodations are non-embedded, meaning that there are things that are provided to students outside of the test delivery system. You like my embedded tick graphic? I was trying to find something to make people laugh, and I was successful. So, yes, embedded accommodations are like ticks. So, so that's just the difference between the two. And like I said, most of them are non-embedded. And if you look at the Oregon Accessibility Manual, you'll see the list of all the different things that are in there. And so if they're outside of the test delivery system, we just got to make sure they have that support. Some examples of these, an embedded would be text to speech. There's an embedded accommodation. A non-embedded would be something like scribe, because that's a person that's scribing for the student. So nothing has to be changed in the test delivery system for that support to be provided. Any questions on embedded versus non-embedded and various insect bites? All right. All right, so I want to encourage everybody to utilize our assessment website. That's the one I send you a link every week, Monday or Tuesday, with updates and things. So that's pretty much central station for most stuff that you'll need. All the forms are there. If there's a resource that you need that you can't find there, just ask Mary and I, and we'll make sure we get it to you. But it's a good place to go. And please do, what I do is I send that email. Instead of sending you emails with long lists of stuff that you have to wade through, I mostly just will send you an email saying, I've got some new updates on the updates page of the assessment website. Please go look at them. Those are usually something in my opinion, that are fairly important. We'll try to remind you about upcoming deadlines. We'll let you know if the test delivery system is going to be shut down for a period of time. We'll any new information that we get from ODE about testing, we'll put it there. So just consider that, your go-to place for both you and your TAs for information about state testing. So here's a few updates and reminders, and some of this will be, I'll skim past a couple of these because I've already talked about them quite a bit, but I just want to make sure that you all have these in your back pocket. First of all, here's our summative assessment windows for this year. We've got Smarter Balanced ELA and Math opening on March 8th. Same for Science. And then and then so there's one sort of, is anybody, who's secondary here? Anybody is high school? Just one high school. So, so there's one difference with Smarter Balanced for high school. And that is if you have, what ODE did a couple years ago is make it so that 11th graders can test earlier, so that this testing doesn't interfere so much with AP and IB testing, which tends to be at that same period in the spring. So if you have students who are going to AP or IB test, and you would like those students to be able to get into Smarter Balanced earlier and test, please let me know, because what we will do is we will open up in the system a separate test window for you for those students. Because what's going to happen is everything's closed down. Nobody can get into an assessment until that March 8th date. But for high school, if you do want any students to get in and test early, and I would encourage you, if you're going to do that, go as late as you possibly can, like late February, so the students get as much content as possible before they test. But that is an option for you. So just let Mary or I know if that's something that you want to do. And then ELPA opens next week, and is open until mid-April. So we're off and running with ELPA here real soon. Any questions on test windows? All right. For science, just so everybody's back on the same page with science, 3 grade levels, grades 5, 8, and 11. 5, 8, and 11. You can target up and test 10th graders on the test, but I would discourage you from doing that because the new science test is really hard. So I would, to get the best performance out of the kids, I'd let them test at their appropriate grade level. And really, as much as they can do the practice test as possible is a good idea, because it's all the reports that I've gotten is it's a lot harder than the old science test. Once they made it all NGSS aligned, it became a lot more difficult assessment. And then we already talked about the shredding. Brand new this year is the ability to utilize manipulatives for the math, for Smarter Balanced math. So there are specifics about how to do this in the test administration manual. Really the biggest question that I've had so far about manipulatives, 2 questions I've had is, we don't have enough, where do we get them? And so I've been told that there are, the curriculum warehouse does have some extras, but if they run out and you need more, what I've been told by folks upstairs is then you got to just buy them out of your own school budget if you need to use more. And then the other question I've gotten is cleaning protocols in our COVID environment for those. And what I've been told by facilities and others is just use exactly the same protocols that you're using now. So however you would be cleaning up those materials between different groups of students using them, do the same protocols for those, which is spraying them down or whatever you're doing in your buildings. Just use those same protocols for the manipulatives. Any questions? Yeah, Barb.
Well, I was just thinking that the manipulatives have to be used in the classroom. So teachers should probably already have access to the ones that they're utilizing, and they can put those into little bags as opposed to just trying to gather all of these manipulatives, because we don't want to give them things that they're not used to using.
Right. Yeah. And I'm not that familiar with how it's done in the buildings. But yeah, you guys just manage those manipulatives however you feel is the best to do it. And yeah, keeping them in the classroom is certainly the way to go. Thanks, Barb. We already talked about opt-outs and exemptions, so I'm not going to go over that again. Oh, and just one thing I did miss is for Smarter Balance, they have to use the ODE form. If a parent, instead of using our exemption forms for science and ELPA, if they send you a letter or an email saying, I don't want my student to take science or ELPA, that is good as well. So just do the same thing with that. If you can take that letter, write the student ID on it, make a copy of it, send one of them to us, kind of the same protocol. It doesn't have to be that form. They can write a letter or send an email. All right. And as I mentioned earlier, even though that ODE form has that date on it, they can opt out anytime. And then Mary says, yeah, just, I mean, with the opt-out forms, you don't have to actually, you can get them to us any way you want. You can send them in campus mail. You can scan them to us in an email, attach them to a carrier pigeon. I don't really care how we get them. So. One thing that does sometimes trip us up just a little bit is this business. Now we've got kind of an unusual situation this year with accounts in the portal. In the past, ODE has wiped out all of the accounts from the previous year. So what would happen is they would finish their training. We would get the assurance of test security form. We would create their account in the portal. They would get an email, which is their activation email. And that got confusing in the past to some people because the activation email said that it was going to expire in 15 minutes. And we just had to tell the TAs, don't worry about it. All you have to do is go to the login page and click forgot my password. And it walks you through the same process. So even though the email's expired, they can just go in and create their accounts by going into the portal and hitting the forgot password. Things are going to be a little different this year for a variety of reasons. One is ODE they carried over all accounts from last year to this year. So anybody who was a TA last year has got an account this year in Tide. However, the other thing that ODE has done is they have added a layer to the account creation where we have to activate a test group for that TA. So if you have a TA, for example, that on their assurance of test security form, they say, I'm only going to do ELPA. We go in, when we set up their account, we go in and we turn on the ELPA test group. So that would be the only assessment that they have access to. They cannot go and administer Smarter Balanced or administer science. If they check all of them, then we give them all the test groups. So when they carried all the accounts over, all the accounts are there, but they don't have any test groups. So we still have to turn on the test groups for those TAs. However, just turning on the test group does not generate the activation email. So they don't get anything that tells them that their account is ready to go, unfortunately. So there isn't really a heck of a lot I can do about that. What we'll do, Mary and I will do, is that we'll just stay on it. And for the most part, we'll get TA accounts good to go within a day. So they should have that access. So what I would tell your TAs is just wait a day or two after they've turned in their assurance form, and then go ahead and go in and click. If they didn't get the email, click the forgot password and set up their account. Make sense? All right. If they do get the email, if they're a brand new TA, they weren't in here last year, then they will get an email. It'll come from Cambium Assessments, and more than likely it's going to end up in their junk folder. So, you can tell them to check there if they don't see an email. Oops. Domain exemptions we already talked about. And supports and accommodations we've covered pretty thoroughly, I think. One thing I missed when we were talking earlier, and that is one of the rules around designated supports is that we're not supposed to provide blanket support. So for example, let's say a TA thinks, hey, every kid in my classroom is going to, benefit from whatever the designated support might be. That's technically not allowed. We're not allowed to turn on a designated support for every student just because we think they're going to do better if they have it, with one exception, and that is for our dual language students. We can turn on, for the math assessment, we can turn on the translations. Previously, it was referred to as stacked translations. They don't call it that anymore. They just call it translations. But you are, if you're in a building that is a dual language, we encourage you actually to turn on the translations feature on the math test so that those kids have an option of whether they answer those questions in English or Spanish. Okay. Monitoring student progress. If you've done this before, it's pretty straightforward. It's a pretty easy process in the portal to do this. When we get done with the slide deck here, if you want me to walk you through how to do that, I'm happy to do that. This is the process. You go into TIDE to administering tests, monitor test progress, plan and manage testing. You set up filters, and it lets you know where all your students are in the process of testing, whether they've started a test, if they've got one that's paused, or if they've got one, or if they've completed. So I can show you how to do that in TIDE if you're unfamiliar with it. But it's a great little tool just to make sure that you get all your kids tested. Your test administrator training. So what I ask you to do is, I don't require you to have to do anything. I'm leaving it up to you to how you handle your end of the training or your contact with your TAs to support them. I would like it if you please have some sort of set something up where they have an opportunity to connect with you face to face or on Google Meet, however you want to do that. Some people will actually not even send their TAs into the online course. They'll actually, during academic seminar or some other time, they'll actually run through the whole, they'll use Google Classroom, they'll project it, they'll run through the whole thing face to face with their folks or on Google Meet. It's totally fine to do that. Or you can just say, hey, I'm going to, kind of office hours, go through the course. And if you have, I'm going to be here available to you for, during this period of time to go over any questions you have or any concerns. Entirely up to you. You know your folks, you know your staff, you know how you need to support them. So I'm not going to say you have to train them in this certain way. They got to go through the course, the online course, but how you handle your support of them and your additional training and support is entirely up to you. So Lisa had her hand up first, and then Barb.
Thank you for that, Tom. So my question is, do you know about how many hours it will take TAs to go through the material? Because it seems like there's more than there used to be, but I don't know, maybe it's been a couple years and I forgot. Yeah. And then how long do you think it will take them? Like, how long is the quiz? Because the quiz honestly took me a while, and I've been doing this for a long time. So I'm just curious, like, how much time to allot for our TAs.
I would say 2.5 to 3 hours is usually what it takes to get through all of the content, including the quiz. And really the quiz is really a self quiz. Again, I'm not, hard-nosed about the quiz. I want them to take it, and I want them to try to get, and tell them, have the TAM and the OAM sitting there on their desk. Look up every question. And I focus the quiz on things that were the pitfalls that I talked about earlier, things that, we do have where TAs get tripped up. But we don't need to get all crazy about the quiz. I don't even care. I just care that they take it. I want them to pass it with a 90%, but I'd say, you guys use your judgment on how you want to manage that. All we're trying to do here is to make sure that the TAs are good to go, that they're going to be able to create test sessions, test kids, not have any improprieties, have everything go smoothly. So however you want to handle that in your building is up to you. Barb?
First, thank you for having a new quiz. I was pleasantly surprised that there were different questions or the way you asked them was different. But I just wanted to say that in the Google Classroom for test coordinators, the TAM is from last year, not this year's.
Oh, I fixed it.
You did? Okay.
Yeah.
It's not fixed on mine, so I don't know how to get it fixed on my end. So I just wanted to make sure it was the right one for the TAs.
Yeah, thank you. I did. Somebody else found my mistake, so I fixed it. Yeah, so we're good to go now.
It still worked for me. I still.
There's not a big difference. I think some of the pages were different, but yeah, sorry about that. All right, we good on that one? So this will be the process. So they go through the online, and then you decide how you want to meet with them face to face. They do the quiz, and then when they've finished everything, they go back into the course and submit the assurance of test security form, and that's our trigger to set up those test groups for your TAs. And I put the invite link and the join code down there. Just be really careful. Don't send your TAs to your training. We have this problem sometimes where you get mixed up between the two join codes, and just try to avoid that. What Mary and I kind of monitor your training, your test coordinator training. If we see TAs in there, we kick them out and we let you know that a TA got into the wrong one. So. All right, so we're almost done here, under an hour. This is the fastest I've gone so far, so that's good. So just to wrap up, please utilize the state assessment website. Check those weekly updates. If there's anything urgent that comes up that is time sensitive and I can't wait till the Monday updates that I send out, we'll send you an email to the group so that you have that information. Be careful, as I said, that you're sending your TAs to the right training. And just also know there is one thing that might come up for you is, and it already has a couple times. So because of the ELPA screener, and in particular because we had so many more people who were administering the unique screener sessions this fall, we have quite a few folks in buildings who went through the ELPA screener training. And they also may be some of your TAs, and they may say to you, hey, I don't have to train. I already did that for the ELPA screener. So the answer to that is no, I'm sorry. You have to do the other training. Now you can give them a caveat. There is the module that's in the screener training for test security is the same one that's in the other training. So they don't have to repeat those modules that they've already done. But if they're going to be administering anything other than the screener, including the ELPA summative, then they have to do the full TA training. Lisa?
That was kind of my question. If they're going to be only administering the ELPA, do they have to go through the full training, even though it's only the ELPA?
Right. So I mean, basically all they're going to be doing, Lisa, though, is they're going to be going in there and they have to do the ELPA summative module because they've already done the other ones. They've already done the test security ones. So it's very little that they need to do. They skip all the rest of them. You only need to do the modules for the assessments that you are going to be administering.
That's what I'm talking about. Like people who haven't been trained at all right now, who we only want to do the ELPA, then they don't obviously have to do the ELA and what have you. Just the okay.
Yeah, and that's really clearly spelled out in that first module in that intro. It tells them like you only have to do the modules for the assessments that you're going to be administering.
Thanks, Tom, for the reminder. Thank you.
There's a couple required ones like module 1 and 2, I think, and then like ELPA is module 7, and that would be all they have to do. And one of those 2 is the security module. So if they did the screener, they don't even have to do that one. I mean, it'd be good to as a refresher, but they don't have to. Let's see. Test schedules, try to get those set up. It is a bit confusing. It used to be we just had training tests. Now they have what they call sample tests. They have training tests. So the sample tests for the most part are on an open website that anybody can get into. So teachers can use that with kids. They can go in, find their grade level, go through a sample test. Those sample tests are really more just to get familiar with the test delivery system and sort of what questions are going to feel like when they get them. So those are there in open websites. There is a methodology that can be used, and it's not well documented in the OSAS portal, whereby a TA can actually set up a fake test session where students, it's still using essentially the same groups of questions that are delivered in the sample test, but you can set it up so that it's actually, there's a TA with a TA interface. The students have to log in the same way that they would log in, like with their SSID, that kind of thing. So if you have brand new TAs and they've never administered an assessment, they've never set up a test session before, there is a way to fake that and give them practice doing that. So if you have, I was gonna do a video for it. It's a little complicated because I can't just go ahead and do it like with a Screencastify, because you have to actually have two computers to do it. One that's like the student computer and one that's like the TA computer. So I'm going to try to figure that out over the next week or so and see if I can do a video for you on it. But it is kind of a nice resource if you have TAs that have never done this before, that they can get the feel of what it's like to actually set up a test session and be in the TA interface for a test session. So more information to come on that. But otherwise, it's just the sample tests that are on the open website. We should have less problems with this year than we have in previous years with all the work that we've been doing around the district on our fiber optic network and our access points deployed throughout the buildings. Still, I encourage you to be somewhat sensitive to the bandwidth in your building. What I would discourage you from doing is, testing 200 kids that are all in one hall at the same time, where maybe you only have 1 or 2 APs that are available. I mean, you could get jammed up on that, but I think, with the kind of testing that we're doing now and the way we're doing them in classrooms, and every classroom's got an access point, I don't think we're going to run into this, but just be sensitive to that. And then, of course, if you are going to bring groups of students into labs or into, with Chromebooks that are on a wireless network, just be sensitive to how, basically you can't put more than about 30 kids on one access point without it running so slow that it's impossible to test. So just be kind of aware with, and again, work with your site techs on that as well. We talked about Chromebook updates, EL flags. This is another one that sometimes gets to be a little bit of a problem. If we have a new student to the district who has not been previously designated as an active EL in Synergy, and somehow they end up getting into an ELPA test session before their EL status has been updated in Synergy, then if TIDE sees the student as EL no, it won't let them into the ELPA summative. They have to be an active EL in the TIDE system in order to be able to test. We don't have a lot of these come up, and it's usually just with new students and sort of timing around getting language use surveys, getting them screened, whatever it takes to kind of get them, get their status updated in Synergy. The way that this gets into TIDE is we do what are called SSID uploads. My Synergy staff member does this 2 times a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He does SSID uploads. So if we have a brand new student come in on a Monday, first it's got to get into Synergy. If it's not into Synergy, say it gets into Synergy on Tuesday, then it takes at least 36 to 48 hours once it's been changed in Synergy from that date, that Tuesday or Thursday, for it to get into TIDE. So you may have to wait for that flag to be turned on in the system for up to like a week. So just be aware of that, and just to make sure that when a student qualifies for services, that gets turned on in Synergy as early as possible. But if you do run into this, please just let Mary and I know, because we can, we'll get their status updated. We'll work with Carolyn and others to get it updated in Synergy ASAP. And as I said, your training model for, so your folks is up to you. And yeah, I already talked about resets and reopenings. And that's it. That's all I have for now. Here's all the contact information for Mary and I. One question I have come up sometimes is like, when do I talk to my site tech? When do I contact you? When do I call OSAS portal? with a testing problem. Really, the only time that you really want to get a hold of Cambium assessments or ODE is if you are really sure that what's happening is a problem with the test delivery system itself. And then you're going to want to be, you want to have an active test session. You want to get on the phone or get online. They have an online chat. I've tried it. People actually get on there and respond to you right away. But that's kind of the only time that you really need to contact ODE vis-a-vis Cambium assessments, is if you really like something's going wrong with the actual delivery of this in my kid's secure browser. They keep getting kicked out, or something seems to be going haywire with the test delivery system itself. Otherwise, try to work in your building with your site techs or others to try to figure out, diagnose the problem there. So yeah, did I miss anything, Mary? Okay, I'm going to stop the recording. And then if there's any other questions, or if you want me to show you